Greetings, all. I am coming to you today to discuss varying themes that are active in the collective. And I've sat down to record this video a few times, and I'm honestly finding it difficult. I am feeling an overwhelming sense of grief and energy percolating, and it's kind of the heaviness of the seer that happens to sensitive and intuitive people, people who kind of can see beyond the veils, people who aren't certain of everything. And today, there's just been, it's not even just today, it's kind of been this week, there's been this like investigation about censorship. And that makes me sad because I think that we've got kind of a warped sense of how we connect and how we express ourselves right now in Western society. And I'm really hoping that in looking at some of the evolutionary shifts that we're on the cusp of, that there'll be a transformation in those things. This is such a big month for astrology. So I thought that um, maybe at first I was like, maybe I'll try and cover it all. But instead, what I'm thinking, because there just is so much alive and active, is that we'll talk about just one aspect and then come back and talk about the other. So we'll do sort of a series of videos. We do have a new moon coming up, sorry, a full moon coming up in Capricorn along the Capricorn Cancer axis, which is important, you know. We also have the nodes changing signs. And so they're moving from Taurus Scorpio into Libra and Aries. And this is a really important shift for us. The nodes are these like evolutionary points in the overall chart, and they tend to speak to us about the themes that are arising in the collective that are meant to move humanity forward, to help us evolve. And it's not that we ever really move forward, you know, like we're not necessarily existing in linear time, we exist in cyclical time. So it's kind of like it just shows us where we are on the trajectory, and what our evolutionary assignments are as a collective as we spiral through evolution. And so perhaps it's important to talk first a little bit about like what the nodal axis really is. And I've kind of taken some notes because, as I said, there's so much swirling. I thought that I would try and keep myself organized. So the nodal axis are 2 points there where the moon's nodes are, and they're where our eclipses happen. So wherever the nodal axis is in its 19 month journey, is the signs that we'll have our eclipses in for that time period. And so we were just in the Taurus Scorpio axis, and the nodes move backwards. So they're going to move into the Aries Libra axis. The South Node, the nodes in general, let's start with that, really show us what we're here to learn, what we brought in with us, what we're supposed to, from an evolutionary standpoint, be evolving into and integrating from an evolutionary perspective in our lifetime. So we all have a set of nodes in our chart. And then we have what we call the transiting nodes, which talk to us more on a collective evolutionary level, what we're supposed to be working on, right? And so we'll all collectively together be feeling the influence of the nodes. Again, of course, the collective translates into our personal lives, but where the nodes are now in the sky, just keep in mind, aren't necessarily where the nodes are in your chart. And so there are many different schools of thoughts about the nodes and what they represent. So I'm going to try and generalize a little bit. So essentially, astrologers believe that the South Node is like the point of incarnation. It is like a point of accumulated karma. And it speaks to us a lot about what we're already good at, like what we already have mastery in, because essentially we have already learned and integrated those things in a past life. So the South Node looks a little bit like a cup. And I like to say that this is our medicine cup. It's the cup of mastery that we've already walked into this world with. For instance, mine happens to be in Pisces. And so I'm very comfortable playing in the spiritual realms, being like in the liminal unknown. And my North Node is in Virgo. And the North Node tends to talk to us about what we need to be learning, what we need to integrate in order to come into a place of balance and feeling like wholeness in a sense. And so Pisces is this very undifferentiated space. It's very unknown. It's very dreamlike and imaginal. And then we have Virgo, which is very much a sign about service and embodiment. It's about analysis, discernment, getting things right, organization. And it's ruled by Mercury. So it's very, if we to understand this nodal axis well, and this is just mine personally in my chart, we would look at like Pisces as the diffuse light of a camping flashlight and Virgo as the laser pointer, right? The light that coalesces very finely. So essentially looking at the notes, it's like, well, here's someone who does really well in the unknown, can be grounded in groundless places, but who potentially has a hard time with organization and putting structure around things, Mercury tasks, right? And so right now we're moving from Taurus, who's ruled by Venus, and Scorpio, who is ruled by Mars, and in modern astrology, also Pluto. And we are moving into, and it's kind of a swap, right? So we're moving into Aries, who's ruled by Mars, and Libra, who's ruled by Venus. And so we're not changing planets, but we are changing signs. And what these signs represent are different, even though the rulership of the planets of these places are the same. So Taurus really speaks to us about this sense of building, right? Like if you think about that idea in Ayurvedic, that sense of the all growing, the all nourishing, right? The babe who is now on the teat of the mother and just growing, growing, growing. There's this sense of life in Taurus, right? There's this sense, we would call it a place of accumulation. It's ruled by Venus, and Venus rules our values and our resources. So it's this place that we are accumulating life and experience. It is a lush place in the chart. It's very slow. It's a fixed sign. And so as we have had our North Node there's been this focus on the themes of growing, and that really aligns with or is resonant with the energy of the North Node anyways, because it's kind of this place that we want to sort of grow into or accumulate. In Vedic astrology, they think of the North Node as being a place of greed or hunger. And then we had the South Node in Scorpio, which again resonates really well with the energy of Scorpio because it's a point of purging. It's where we're shearing off karma, right? The South Node. We are tying up karmic lessons and letting things go to make space for the new life to come in. And so we've been in this space as a collective, and I think part of the issue is we moved from Gemini Sagittarius, which is a very mental kind of masculine. It's like a fire air axis. And if you can think back to where we were in the beginning of COVID times, there was all this like evolutionary lessons about information and media and thinking, and how we took in the information and then building philosophies and camps, which is Sagittarius, and trying to get to the truth of everything. That was like the evolutionary lesson there. So then we got into this period then with the Taurus Scorpio axis. So the first, I'm not sure, I'd have to look at charts to see how long. I think that really the nodal shift happened right when COVID began. So the first 18, 19 months of COVID was Gemini Sag, and then we moved into Taurus Scorpio. And that was looking at like, okay, so now that this thing is starting to wrap up and we've essentially moved into a whole new reality, how do we want to live, and what do I have to let go of in order to live that life, And for some of us who aren't really on a spiritual path, a lot of times we'll get stuck in one side of the polarity. And in Western society, it's generally the North Node side of the polarity that has to do with greed or hunger or accumulation, right? Like we tend to live in a death phobic culture. We have trouble letting things go. And we are all about growing and success and life. And so we'll notice that people who aren't very spiritually awake ended up kind of in that pull of really looking at the Venusian side of things, arguing over values, um, trying to accumulate resources. We're moving into some financial instability. We've got Uranus there right now. And so it's been a time of kind of a little bit of insecurity. Uranus caused insecurity in the financial markets, but some insecurity around our resources, right? And like what we had to resource us. So now that the nodes are moving again, so Mars and Pluto having that death aspect to them that ruled Scorpio, and Venus with that growth aspect and that kind of attraction, that allurement, that capacity to build. Now we're moving into where the North Node is going to be in a Mars ruled sign. So that's Aries. And then Libra is the Venus ruled sign in this case. And so it's going to be the South Node there. And they act differently. Though they both have a lot to do with embodiment, they're considered personal planets. So we have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars as our personal planets. We have Jupiter and Saturn as the social planets. Chiron is kind of the rainbow bridge between the first 7 planets and then the last set of planets. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as our transpersonal planets. That makes sense. So because Venus and Mars have so much to do with just what it is to be human, they're personal planets. What does it mean to be human, to be incarnated, to be in a body, and to be experiencing life in this way? We haven't had an axis ruled by a transpersonal planet for a while. So we haven't really gotten out in the weeds. This has been all about survival and society for a while, the evolutionary energy that we're in. And so with Aries, I actually wrote down some of the things that I thought were important. Not that I don't know what Aries rules, but because I want to make sure that I hit on specific things. So understanding that the North Node is how we expand, right? It's how we grow. It's kind of what we're here to learn. So Aries is essentially the essence of I am. It is the divine spark, right? It is the initial spark of life, or like when we hit the match against the matchbook, that initial spark. It is ruled by Mars, so it's passionate and impulsive, instinctive, intuitive, strong, compelling, bombastic, and it's instigating. It's a cardinal sign. So it likes to begin projects. I have a moon in Mars, and so I can be very like, I think of things quickly. I have lots of inspiration all the time. And I can be very impulsive. I run on instinct, really, and that's very much a moon in Aries kind of thing. But there's this, we need support from other places to, one, put structure behind our ideas. And we're going to have a Saturn involvement here soon with the Mars, which helps with that kind of thing. Or if you've got Saturn involved in any of your Aries placements, that helps to bring structure in, right? But there's this sense of quickness and impulsiveness about Aries. It's strong and it's opinionated, and right, Mars, and it needs something to kind of tone it and help contain it. I think the most important thing really to understand, that's the energetic side of it, to really understand is that kind of factor of, from a deeper esoteric perspective, that Aries is that divine initial spark of life. So we can look at it as like the essence of the self, where we get a body in Taurus, like from an evolutionary perspective, like here's the spark of life that comes in Aries, and then we're given an embodiment in Taurus, like a body. So think of Taurus. Taurus is the bull, right? And the word Karn is associated with the bull, and that's incarnation. It's an earth sign, matter, right? So Aries is still in the sort of in the etheric in a way. But because it is the sign after Pisces, there's this point of severing or differentiation, whereas Pisces is that liminal pool, that undifferentiated space. I like to call it the area in which we travel on our way into this incarnation and the waters we travel on the way out. Well, this is where we're separated in that first spark of life into our own soul. So there's this differentiation. There's a point in Aries that is severing. And so there's this sense of encapsulation and discovery here. Like, who am I at my essence? No additions, no subtractions, just that encapsulated essence of myself. And then on the other side of this evolutionary axis, we have Libra, who is ruled by Venus, and Venus wants to connect, right? Like, there's this sense of attraction. Venus's action is a lot like glue, right? It wants to be in connection. It is very difficult for Venus to know who she is without other. And we can say those words in a way for the Aries Libra axis, like self and other, right? But it's self not in the perspective of necessarily putting on a identity or even a personality. It's like self, like I'm here. It's very present. The sun is exalted in Aries. The sun has to do with presence, right? Just like this now moment. And Aries has that immediacy to it, right? So self, no additions, no subtractions. And then Libra is like other and connection. We're talking about with the natural first and seventh houses. And so again, like Aries is the area of the chart where we have that aspect of the ascendant, or, you know, that first budding of spring, right? Where the green of a plant bursts onto the scene, that very fresh newness. And then the seventh house is the house of what? Relationship, right? We look at it like it's the house of the opposition. And so again, I want to make sure that I cover everything. We had that idea of severance, right? With Aries is coming out of the liminal space of unity and oneness that is Pisces. And then with Libra, and then there's this whole developmental process that happens right through Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and onwards, where we're essentially developing the self now. Now we're adding on this stuff. We're doing the exploration of what does it mean to be an incarnated person. Now, when we get to the opposition, which is Libra from Aries, we begin then to want to connect outside of ourselves. And this is that exploration of understanding ourselves in reference to other, and that mirroring aspect of Libra. Libra rules relationship in its highest form from an exoteric perspective, right? So not esoteric, not inner, not evolutionary, but like it's, and maybe from an esoteric perspective too, but I wouldn't name it the highest. It's attunement, the capacity to be refined inside of our connection. It's attunement to others, to people, and then to life itself, like to what is arising in this now moment. So we've got that immediacy with Aries, right? And what is arising in the now moment, being the embodiment of that, what is arising, being the holder of the divine spark. And then in Libra, it is, how do I then relate with this divine spark? How do I attune myself to my environment? There's this desire in Libra to have harmony, right? And balance in the environment, which essentially means that we have to be the contrast of that, right? That we are not, to know balance, we have to be out of balance. So there's this kind of always mitigating and moving factor of Libra that is consistently trying to be in harmony and attunement with its environment. But it's the seeking of that thing, right? It's the action of that thing. It's not necessarily that we ever strike a perfect balance. We may hit it for a minute, we may hit it for a day, but life isn't static. It's not meant to be. Stasis indicates death is setting in. And so there is this constant movement in Libra to be seeking a balance. And so Libra also rules feeling, because Venus rules feeling and how we connect with others. And again, like I said, that capacity for mirroring. On the flip side of Libra, like on the shadow side, like we said, Aries can be impulsive and bombastic and not have really the elegance or refinement to move through the world, right? It's just very, it hasn't been indoctrinated or conditioned yet, Aries, right? Well, with Libra, it's kind of the flip side of that. There's this codependency and people pleasing in an effort towards that harmony and that attunement. It's like the giving up of self in order to be in relationship with others. This desire that others show up in archetypal purity, right? Libra really, there's this, as we are conditioned in this period between Aries and going through this process of getting to know the self and how the self fits in the world and how we become safe. And we will see that Cancer and Capricorn, which square this axis, have to do with these themes of like, how do I feel safe and how do I fit into the world, and being conditioned and being part of a closed system, being part of a society, functioning member, right, of society. So in that, we tend to lose ourselves, or it can happen. It's happened to most of us. And in fact, it's part of the process of individuation, as Jung talks about. Like, we go through this period of being conditioned. We kind of hit Libra, right? That midpoint where we're like, wait, I've lost myself sort of inside of this relationship, in this desire to get along and to have love and to be in relationship. What have I given up of myself? And then to individuate, we look at then, what do we need to reclaim? What is interdependence versus codependence? And as I sat today and I really looked at, I almost wanted to cry, and I couldn't exactly put my finger on why, other than, a really, one of my favorite things to do. I was an only child, and I was such an observer growing up. And I realized when I took my daughter to the mall not long ago that I really like people watching. And I'm always doing that as an astrologer and somebody who forecasts and makes kind of predictions and has commentary on how the planets are affecting society. It's something that I watch. And what I've been seeing crop up is this very militant kind of ideological camps, the lack of capacity for connection inside of like political and even non-political, but more collective discourse, the inability to feel the truth at all, the desire for everybody to indoctrinate everybody else into their way of being. This is kind of a function of Pluto being in the last degrees of Capricorn and having been in Aquarius. Is this like a Capricorn rules closed systems, and the idea of conditioning people so that they conform, think of the rings of Saturn, into the closed system. And Aquarius wants to get out of the closed system. And so we can, and then to like push society forward. And we can sort of see this playing out, whereas Capricorn is sort of the Republicans and wanting to keep tradition and for there to be a sense of cohesion and conformity inside of the collective. And then Aquarius wanting to be more egalitarian, being, very interested and invested in social justice movements and, you know, wanting to move society forward. But really, when I look, there's just a distortion in both camps. And what the distortion is really speaks to me of what is squaring Capricorn, right? And that last degree where Pluto is, which is actually where the nodes are going to be once they move into the sign, right? They're going to be at the 29th degree of Aries and Libra. Pluto's at the 29th degree of Capricorn. And what I see in there is a lack of connection. And the fact that nobody's really got any idea or refinement or honoring of self and connection. And those are two really important things. And on an axis, what we're dealing with is a polarity that needs to be integrated. And so it's like, I want you to respect my, my ideology, and this ideology is the kind thing. And you're an extremist if you don't follow this ideology, and it's unkind. And I'm looking at the method in which they are expressing themselves in trying to, I assume, persuade people into their camp, and thinking, this isn't very connective. And if I wanted somebody to really hear my point, I wouldn't be stating my point in the energy of the Death Mother. And yet that's what's happening. And so, and then on the other side, it's just, again, kind of like nonstop name calling. And, these people want to move the world forward. And if you don't, you're a bigot and an extremist. But if you do, you're a communist. And I'm like, this is just such a mess. And maybe we will have an opportunity to bring some refinement into how we connect with each other in a way that, like, on the left side of the political divide, they are fighting for expression through censoring. Like, you can't say these words, you can't say these certain things, this thing is hurtful, why do you have to talk like this? There's this real militant feeling of policing expression and censorship. And there's been some other stuff that's come out about censorship, and so maybe we'll talk about that at some point. For me, I'm really against any kind of censorship, even hate speech, but just in the sense that, because it's a moral obligation not to use hate speech, I'm just not sure that it should be, I'm not sure that it's something that should be litigated, right? Or brought into like the government's arena to police. I think if we raised our children better, we wouldn't have had to make laws about hate speech. I don't necessarily dislike the laws. I just wish there wasn't a need for them, because really what we're here to do as humans, why we incarnate at all, is to express, right? That we're here to be the expression of our soul, the expression of that divine spark. And it's interesting to see how these two sides are mirroring the same energy back to each other, but it's basically inhibitory of that full expression, right? And it's labeling people as like the demon or the other. And there isn't this capacity to see the essence of the other person and honor it. And one of the kind of, I love that spiritual idea of namaste, like the divine in me sees the divine in you. But really, for like Aries and Libra, there is this like the essence self in me, like the me that with no additions and no subtractions sees and honors the essence in you. And there's this way that, like, so we're talking about this polarity with the end of Capricorn and Pluto and kind of hanging out at the end of Capricorn and Aquarius, and that's squaring this nodal axis. There's this way that, some of like the deeper Libra mystery school lessons are really about karma and the ascendant path. Saturn is exalted here, and Saturn really wants to keep us on the path of the ascetic, and like keep us on a narrow path. We can call it like the place of the narrow door, so that we can purge karma. It's sort of this area where Mat, the goddess of cosmic laws, comes in. She has her scales with the heart and the feather, and she says, you can only make it into heaven if your heart weighs less than a feather. That's hard work in a lifetime, right? And I'm not really exactly sure that's what we're here for. I think it's more of that idea is more archetypal in a sense. But because of that, Libra can be an area where we really get into archetypal purity. When we don't have safety in our relationships, we tend to expect people to show up in their archetype or in their role versus allowing them to be fully human, which is what this axis is about. It's about the capacity to be fully human with each other. And so with Libra, one of the sort of shadow sides is this idea that, your spouse would show up in the role of what we think a perfect partner should be. And so we tend to relate to them with that filter or through that lens versus just being with the human in that. I'll never forget that, like, the greatest part of my healing, my own mother wound, was when I let go of all of the shoulds that encompass the archetype of mother and just started relating to my mom as Betsy, and just seeing her as a fallible, imperfect human. It just healed so much. And so there's this sort of tendency in Libra to hold people to this archetypal purity. It's kind of codependent. We do that for safety. We do that. It's a projection, right? This kind of archetypal purity is obviously a projection. Projection's kind of a shadow side of Libra, or that mirroring effect. And there's when we do this, it is in a sense an ideal, right? An archetype, and holding someone to an archetypal, the level of archetypal purity, right, is in essence idealistic, and idealism isn't real. They're very different feeling tones. Really, Capricorn tends to, yes, it's about conformity, but it tends to also, just as another thing that it governs, it tends to deal with the isness of life, like responding to reality. Whereas Aquarius has this kind of like progress and egalitarianism, and this like wanting to look out for the group. And it also holds inside of that as the great hope of humanity in relation to the tarot. Aquarius is the star card. It's very related to idealism and ideological movements and being bogged down by ideological ideas. And they're trining each other. They're both air signs. Of course, they're related in that kind of similar way. The Libra and the archetypal purity, and Aquarius and the ideological notions that we tend to get into when we're playing around in that sign. And we can really do everyone a lot of damage. And that's kind of what I see happening in some of the ideological movements, is this projection of an archetype. And the more we do that through these social justice movements, the fewer and fewer archetypes there are acceptable to embody, right? It's like the cultural cutouts for archetypal embodiment, for which cutout we can jump into, has gotten down to like about 8 or 10. Think about the labels. You can be this, you can be this, you could be this, but it's over acculturation is what it is, right? And so my hope for the evolutionary kind of movement of Aries and Libra is that we can come back to first principles. Aries is kind of that idea, it can be that idea of like beginner's mind, or the Fool in the tarot, that we begin a new journey of honoring people as humans, that we remember that connection is the most important thing. And this won't happen without growing pains because Pluto's here. So it's not like it's going to be a graceful process. It'll probably be messy. I'm just hoping after this 19 months, there's been a kind of wake up to, let's see, the themes of Libra, the importance of balance, right? The importance of that kind of cause and effect idea, and how important integrating polarities are. And so hopefully to get out of this left right mindset. And then, the capacity to honor and allow people to be fully themselves and fully self-expressed. And I really feel that the left has some wonderful ideas about love and kindness in theory, but in practice, it seems almost all wrong to me. And so I think there's this real need to come, all of us, back home to our divine spark and remember that. And with Venus moving into this Leo cycle, I feel like there's a chance of that, because Venus and Leo and the sun are all about, like, the sun is like that present moment and expanding our consciousness and knowing ourselves and our true nature. And Leo is about play and experiment and wonder and curiosity and courage. Cour is the word for heart in French, and curiosity and courage and the capacity to be visible and be seen are all Leonine things, right? And so hoping that what I don't see in the left is, in this drive for tolerance, I don't see tolerance. It's kind of funny irony in a way. And what I'm hoping is that we break out of that, because, progress is important. It's important to evolve. And so I'm not somebody who wants to hold us back. I don't love conformist nature. I think I'm a really good mix between kind of like really appreciating newness and progress, and wanting to build a society that is loving and connective and feels good for our children, but also one that's based in truth, that encompasses the isness of life and can respond in real time instead of like talking points. And that's for either side of the political spectrum. So what we're really looking at with this overall axis is that idea, like, how can I begin to show up and honor the essence of myself and get in touch with the essence of myself, the my true nature, the me with no additions and no subtractions. And I believe the key to that is the Leo, is the that like curiosity, play, wonder, like staying in a space of sort of magic. And that only arises when we're really in the present, right? When we're really not too worried about ideological stuff and, oh my gosh, what is going to happen, and kind of doomsday apocalyptic narratives. And then also, but connection. And then how do I connect to people from this place, from that essence of who I am? How do I connect to the essence of who they are? And it comes through seeing their innocence, which is also a Leo thing, right? It's seeing that they're innocent and looking for the essence of who they are. So this is my kind of spiel on the nodes. Of course, there's always more to say, but I think I've spoken long enough. And I did want to talk about everything. And then I'm like, there's just too much happening. So we'll begin with the nodes. The astrologers kind of track what we call the mean nodes, which are the average, or the true nodes, which are exactly. The nodes can be a little bit erratic, and that's why we use often the mean nodes. So the mean nodes change signs on the 11th. And it is later, closer, I think, to the 19th for the true node change. But anyhow, we're feeling it now. So we're already under the pressing of this energy from the Taurus Scorpio, that accumulation and purging, to this kind of more focus on connection. And watch how everybody judges, how everybody shows up, and how there's this kind of like chaos around mirroring, and there's tons of projection that pops up in the collective, and how we're less worried about values than we are about feelings. Like how it's going to shift into feelings. So just track it if you can. And I'll be back with you guys later. All right.